Welcome to Create a Learning Site, a place to go deeper in your study of the Bible, and to my final report on the reading project. I accomplished the mission. I managed to complete my reading of the IVP Dictionary of the Old Testament Prophets in the 10 weeks that I gave myself for it. Therefore, this will be a bit of a celebration. Now, I managed to accomplish the mission, but did I fulfill my objectives? Let's have a look. So these are the objectives from the initial letter or report on this project. I get up to date on scholarship dealing with the Old Testament prophets and gain a number of new insights on the way to be shared with you. It helps you and I understand and appreciate the prophets better. You are inspired to do some serious reading yourself. Now, I can only speak for myself, of course, and to take this in reverse order, I therefore do not know if you have been inspired to do some serious reading for yourself. Neither do I know if it has helped you to understand the prophets better. For myself, however, I'm afraid the gains on this second point were a bit meager. I was hoping for more. On the positive side, it has given me a renewed fresh appreciation for the incredible and inexplicable Isaiah, and a renewed interest in the somewhat tortured structure of Jeremiah. And there is more, but all in all it has not been an abundant harvest. At the same time, it has lowered my esteem, at least for a section of the scholarly community. I continue to think that scholarship is very important, but obviously there's quite a bit of scholarship poorly done. The level of nonsense that's sometimes produced, wearing a grave, serious, impressive academic demeanor, has been a bit of a shock to me, to be honest, even though this is far from my first exposure to it. So most likely then it's the first objective that I have actually fulfilled best, because it has put me up to date at least on that scholarship that follows a clear historical critical bent, ascribing much of the prophetic writings to generations of scribes living after the prophets. So that's the axiom of the many hands that I've discussed in previous reports on this project. And I'm not sure if that's a great gain, but it is at least a small one. So you can probably tell that my final evaluation of this book is not overly positive. As it turned out, this is indeed a compendium of scholarship, not an introduction or handbook to the prophets. Now, how well does this help to read the prophets with understanding? Some, but not all that much, I would think. In an Amazon review, I did write one on Amazon, but I would give this book 2.5 stars if I could. I gave it 3 stars in the review, but added that I would only give it 2 for evangelical readers. I still wonder what the intended audience of this book is. It seems too little for the real expert, the biblical scholar, but the often heavy academic style does not make it very accessible for a broader audience of non-experts. To put it mildly, the experts are not always gifted as writers. Perhaps theology students would benefit the most from this work as a shortcut or quick overview that would make for a small readership. One more point of critique: since IVP InterVarsity is the publisher, I was expecting an evangelical dictionary. However, I doubt that it is. I'm not thinking here in terms of labels and contentious debates about evangelicals supposedly good and liberals supposedly bad. I certainly do not want to judge the individual contributors or deny them the term evangelical as a self-designation, if that's how they want to identify themselves. No, I'm wondering because of the way the dictionary as a whole positions itself, consistently building on non-evangelical scholarship of the past as its point of departure. It does not find this point in evangelical scholarship or the debate in the questions that have been of special concern to evangelicals. In other words, the dictionary locates itself in a conversation among, well, for lack of a better word, mainline non-evangelical scholars, not in a conversation among evangelical believers or within the evangelical movement. In fact, the dictionary does not interact all that much with evangelical scholars of the past or with specific evangelical concerns. A point in case, the comparatively long article on Jonah, the book of Jonah, one of the most conservative in this volume actually, does not offer any discussion of the fish. Isn't this an obvious question for many of us? Before moving on to my top 10, I will share one more significant new thing that I've learned from this dictionary. Since the 1990s, there's been intense debate about seeing the 12 minor prophets as one book and studying it as such. The idea is not entirely new, but it has drawn a lot more support in recent years. In the Jewish Bible, the minor prophets are counted as one book, since they were originally written on one scroll. It is usually referred to as the Book of the 12. However, that of course is not yet the same as treating it or seeing it as one unified work. After all, it does contain 12 seemingly independent prophetic texts. So why might they be one work? Already the 19th century scholar Franz Delitzsch noticed that each book in the collection includes at least one phrase from the book preceding it. Often this phrase appears in the last chapter of the preceding prophet and the first chapter of the succeeding one. So we get a chain of phrases connecting the books. One obvious example is Joel 3 verse 16, the Lord roars from Zion. These words are repeated in Amos chapter 1 verse 2. In addition, certain themes, such as the Day of the Lord, are repeated throughout most or even all of these books. It wasn't until the 1990s, however, that some began to argue, in addition to this, that the 12 books were also connected through an ongoing plot or storyline, and therefore should be considered a literary unit, perhaps not quite like a single book, but something in that direction. This book tells the story of Israel's sin, its punishment, and then in the 3 post-exilic prophets, its restoration. Now, given 12 more or less random building blocks, such as a thought, a topic, or a text, it will usually be possible to connect them through some sort of narrative, turn them into a story. Any 12 elements you can turn into a story. Here's another issue or problem for the theory. Unfortunately, the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the Old Testament, has the minor prophets in a different order, for which then a different plot is proposed. In the Septuagint, supposedly Hosea and Amos tell about the northern kingdom, Israel, and Micah and Joel focus on Jerusalem. Obadiah, Jonah, and Nahum tell about judgment on the nations. Habakkuk and Zephaniah, judgment for Judah, and the post-exilic prophets then complete the story. Again, take any 12 pieces or elements and it will be possible to turn them into a story. Here's another problem for the theory. It's based on the scrolls that have been found near the Dead Sea and the vicinity of Qumran. The non-biblical scrolls from Qumran that cite and comment on the prophetic books always comment only on individual books from the 12 minor prophets. The 12 minor prophets are never viewed as a single prophetic work, even though they are copied on a single scroll and therefore treated as a single book in terms of the format of the collection. So perhaps this is yet one more scholarly idea that will eventually fizzle out to make room for some other novelty. And now for the fun part. Which 10 articles have I found the most helpful for understanding the prophets? A few preliminary remarks. First, putting the question this way immediately excludes a few excellent articles, such as Prophecy and Psychology. They're informative and entertaining, but are not the ones that help us most to understand the prophets. Then second, I generally liked the articles on approaches and methodology. For instance, the one on form criticism certainly helped me to understand this approach better than anything I've read before. At the same time, these articles tend to be difficult and theoretical. Based on the criterion of helpfulness, these two had to be excluded. And then third, the introductions to the prophetic books were usually interesting and at least of some help, even though many fully embrace the axiom of the long and complex development process. I particularly valued the ones on Amos, Zechariah, and Zephaniah. If you can handle the critical scholarship, they're worth reading, but I have not included any in the final selection. And then fourth, if you want more articles that were good but still didn't make it, you need to go to the website at www.wilrens.org. And five, it's been a tough choice. I guess I have to say that. Perhaps the other articles that did not make the final cut won't feel as bad. And one more last thing. I did not consider it feasible to arrange the articles in a hierarchical top 10, counting down from 10 to 1 for the very best number 1. It's subjective enough to choose 10 out of 115. I'm therefore going to present the 10 articles in a more fitting manner for a dictionary, alphabetical order. So here we go. Number 1 is Exodus imagery. In Old Testament prophecy, the Exodus is an important theme. It's also a fundamental reference point and a crucial source of imagery. And it pays off to be aware of this. So if that's new to you, maybe this article can help. Number 2, Israel. I already shared from this article in the previous reading report. It clarifies terminology and it also paints a larger theological picture. Number 3, liturgy and cult. If for no other reason, this article deserves to be mentioned because it's the only one to question the widely accepted post-exilic date and origin of Isaiah 56 through 66, so-called Trito or Third Isaiah. As the author says, this avoids the doubtful proposal of rank idolatry in the post-exilic Jerusalem temple, which draws no fire from any post-exilic prophet. Indeed, what is described in these chapters fit the time before the exile, when idolatry was rampant in Israel, much better. Now, over and beyond this, the article presents a thoughtful and cautious discussion of the involvement of the prophets in the temple cult and the possible presence of liturgical texts in the prophetic books, that is, texts that were used in worship and temple service. So, number 4. The history of prophecy. This one starts off with a reasonable introduction to the prophets and their role within Israelite society. But then the second half is an overview of each of the prophetic writings and how they supposedly came about. Hint, mostly through scribes and editors in many hands. And this is the real reason to include this article here. It gives a thorough taste of the particular historical critical view that underlies this dictionary, provides a summary of the critical consensus it presupposes in many of its contributions, all in one single article. In other words, this is the dictionary of the Old Testament prophets in a nutshell. Read this and you know what most of its other contributors think. So there, you owe me now. I just saved you at least 80 hours of reading. Okay, number 5. This is a long title. Prophecy and Eschatology in Christian Theology. Now, I hesitated to include this because it did not contain much that was new to me, but then it is my specialty, and for people who are somewhat new to the subject of eschatology, the study of the last things or the end times, this would actually be quite a good and evangelical introduction. Number 6, prophecy and society. This is an attempt to understand the prophets as members of their own social world. Obviously, it's important and helpful to understand the prophets as real people within their own society. Number 7, salvation, deliverance. This provides a helpful overview of the terms, stories, and images that are used by the prophets to present the concept of salvation, and it also contains a good discussion of various aspects of it. 8, temple. Not everything about this article is great, but it does explain what the temple was and what it stood for, and it succeeds in something that's not so common in this dictionary, synthesis. It connects the dots even into the New Testament and helps us to develop a coherent understanding, a complete picture of the subject. Number 9 is text and textual criticism. This article gives a taste of the manuscript situation for the Old Testament. Now, thanks to the Dead Sea Scrolls and other relatively recent discoveries and developments, we're now aware of the fact that there existed diversity in the text of biblical books in the first centuries before and after Christ. This is especially true for the book of Jeremiah, as we have seen, but that's not the only example. Apparently, around this time, the biblical texts had not yet been standardized among the Jews, and it's interesting to learn a little bit about this. Number 10, is writing and prophecy, and it argues two absolutely crucial points. First, there is archaeological evidence from other areas in the ancient Near East that prophetic words at times were written down almost immediately after they had been received or spoken. Which speaks against a long period of oral preservation before prophecies were eventually written down. And then second, the essence of being a scribe was being accurate in what one copied or in what one wrote down based on dictation, certainly not in creativity. And on this basis, the author is one of very few in this volume to depart from the party line or axiom that I keep referring to. In the words of the author, Alan Millard himself, a prophet might revise and reorganize his oracles, but whether or not his disciples or later followers could alter them or bring them up to date, as often is alleged, remains hypothetical in the absence of early manuscripts. And the possibility that their oracles were written soon after they had uttered them deserves more attention than it has received in many commentaries. The author is far more cautious in his formulations than I will be in my next sentence. If Millard is right, much in this dictionary is wrong. That's it. Almost. Because now comes the most important part of this podcast. I told you at the launch of this reading project that I would do this, but you may have forgotten. I hereby officially present you with the challenge to start a reading project of your own. What are you going to read? What is a book that would help you grow, whether in biblical studies or perhaps in some other area of your life? It doesn't have to be a dictionary, but it should be something that's at least a bit of a stretch, and therefore requires a formal goal and a disciplined effort. How many weeks are you giving yourself? How much time per day or per week do you intend to invest in this? I'd be very interested in hearing from you if you're going for it. Just click on the square and we'll take you to the site where you can leave a comment.